Get the home field advantage every time with Fairfield by Marriott, official hotel partner of the NCAA. Whether you're a student athlete working toward your championship dreams or your team's biggest fan, Fairfield by Marriott has everything you need to get ready for game day. From comfortable guest rooms to complimentary hot breakfast, Fairfield is part of the Marriott Bonvoy portfolio of hotels and official hotel partner of the NCAA. Visit fairfield.marriott.com to book your next game day stay.
Well, well, well. Shopping for a car?
Yep. Carvana made financing a car as smooth as can be.
Oh, yeah?
I got pre-qualified instantly and had real terms personalized just for me.
Doesn't get much smoother than that.
Well, I got to browse thousands of car options on Carvana, all within my budget.
Doesn't get much smoother than that.
It does. I actually wanted a car that seemed out of my range, but I was able to add a cosigner and found my dream car.
It doesn't get much...
Oh, it gets smoother. It's getting delivered tomorrow.
Visit Carvana.com or download the app to get pre-qualified today.
Why don't more infant formula companies use organic, grass-fed whole milk instead of skim? Why don't more infant formula companies use the latest breast milk science? Why don't more infant formula companies run their own clinical trials? Why don't more infant formula companies use more of the proteins found in breast milk? Why don't more infant formula companies have their own factories instead of outsourcing their manufacturing? We wondered the same thing. So we made ByHeart, a better formula for formula. Learn more at byheart.com.
Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since we discovered Spotify for Podcasters, we feel like having options like video podcasts and Q&A lets us be more creative on another level. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Welcome to On the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined by Nick Stevens. Our co-host Bob Phelan is out with his family this week, having a nice little vacation, but he will be back with us next week. On tonight's episode of On the Verge, we're going to get into some transactions involving the Orioles 40-man roster and talk a little bit how that affects some prospects that are in the system, touch on some Arizona Fall League news, and get into our underappreciated players, the guys that we feel we maybe didn't talk about enough in 2021 that we want to give a little bit of love to on tonight's episode. That's coming up, but first, On the Verge is brought to you courtesy of Mercer Floor and Home Carpet One. Mercer is a third-generation family business that was established in 1959 and is located on Main Street in beautiful historic downtown Westminster, Maryland. For all of your flooring needs, think Mercer. Now, as you know, we are on Patreon. We have some bonuses there for members of our community who pay for as little as $3 to have things such as daily episodes, updated prospects lists, and more. And Nick's going to shout out the new members of our community.
Yeah, we have two new people join us since our last episode, Roberto Gonzalez and Ryan Kelly. So thank you two for joining. We are approaching 60 patrons, which is pretty awesome and mind-blowing at the same time. Thank you all. And yeah, like Zach mentioned, as little as $3 a month. We're doing daily podcasts right now throughout the off season as well. You can get daily recaps of how prospects did in 2021 from other websites, but we're the ones that watch these guys and can provide a little bit better analysis. So come join us. $3 a month. That's it. Come hang out.
Yeah, we would love to have you over there, and thank you to all of our patrons for their continued support. So we'll get into some transactions that the Orioles have made over the last few days, outwriting several players off the 40-man roster. One of them was infielder Pat Vallejo, who we discussed a little bit last week when we talked about players that could be non-tendered. But also outrighted off the 40-man roster were pitchers Thomas Esselman and Connor Wade, along with catcher Austin Wynns. And then it was announced tonight on Monday that all four of those players have elected free agency now that they are off the 40-man roster. So I guess where we'll start with this discussion is Wynns, because we know that Adley Rutschman is going to be the Orioles catcher at some point in 2022, but we have questions about who will be joining him behind the plate, whether that's a current member of the organization or somebody brought in from the outside. I'll just start with you, Nick. Or were you surprised that Wynns was let go at this point?
No, not really. I mean, I also wouldn't be shocked to see him find his way back on this roster on like a new minor league deal at some point in the offseason. I mean, he doesn't really provide you with much production at the plate, and the defense, I think, is just kind of there. I think the only reason he's stuck around this long is just because, he has that really good relationship with pitchers in the system, and you get the vibe that a lot of the pitchers, the John Means, Bruce Zimmerman especially, they really like throwing to wins, and you need a guy like this rebuilding roster. That's fine. Does this open the door for like a Nick Schufo as maybe the number 2 catcher next year? I don't know. Honestly, I think the Orioles are going to bring in another free agent on a small, like a 1-year small contract type deal. I know I threw out the name Manny Pena last week, and I've seen that name thrown around a couple more times since then. I believe you had Roberto Perez was your guy. Great options out there that the Orioles can get. And I think if you want to stash Wins with Schufo down in AAA with the pitchers that are coming up, I think that'd be great if Wins does want to come back. But definitely not shocking, but I don't think this is the last we see of Austin Wins for the Austin Wins fans out there.
I did want to talk about Schufo a little bit because he was a guy that you, Bob, and I were intrigued by after the Orioles brought him in ahead of spring training. Former first rounder, seemed like, especially on defense, that there was some upside there. But because of injuries, we barely saw Schufo in 2021. 17 games at the AAA level and 2 at the major league level. So between those 2 levels, he ended up logging just 64 plate appearances. Do you think that could deter the Orioles from giving him a larger role in 2022? Or do you think at this point you got to consider him in the mix to be at least a backup?
Yeah, I mean, he's in the mix for sure. It's unfortunate that we didn't get to see a whole lot of him this past year. But the defense was just so highly regarded. I think that's one of the big things that made him such a high draft pick. I mean, I think he was a University of South Carolina guy who committed when he was like 9 years old or like 10 years old, something ridiculous. Like, the guy's been lauded for his defense for a very, very long time. So it's an option, but I feel like with the lack of experience and with who the Orioles are going to be bringing up, hopefully at the major league level next year, as far as pitchers go, I just think they're going to want that veteran in there. I personally believe that regardless of any rule changes, whatever, I think even if everything were to stay the same, Adley Rutschman is the catcher on opening day. And you don't need like this grizzled veteran to come be a leader or a mentor to Adley. I don't think Adley needs a mentor like that on the major league roster. I think he is going to be that mentor to a lot of guys on this major league roster. If you want to roll a Schufo, that's good. I didn't really see a whole lot offensively that makes me want to say for sure. And he's so inexperienced. I think bringing in another guy that has a little bit more experience, maybe a little bit better bat will help out on the days that Adley isn't behind the plate, because I also don't think when Adley's up, he's going to be log a significant number of games behind the plate. I wouldn't be shocked if they kind of rested him a little bit, because we know next year that the Orioles aren't going to be competing. So kind of why waste that wear and tear on his knees this year as much as they probably want to.
Yeah, and with the way that they use him in the minor leagues this year, playing first base a lot, DHing from time to time, you have to think that you're going to see that in the major leagues to some extent next year, even if it's not like it was at Bowie, where Rutschman basically was in the lineup every day, because if he wasn't catching, he was playing first base or he was DHing.
Yeah, so that's why I think you probably want a more established veteran, just so you don't, we just didn't really get to see Schufo at all this year. And Brett Cumberland, I think we were hoping would be that guy. But again, Brett Cumberland went like 2 months without hitting a home run after coming out of the gates hot, and just really struggled to hit. And really that on-base percentage he had in AAA this year was super held up by like getting hit by like almost 30 pitches this year. You take those away, even cut those in half. I mean, that on-base percentage is really struggling. And that has been his claim to fame since he was back with the Braves organization. So a disappointing for Cumberland as well, maybe helps out Schufo's case a little bit more. But yeah, again, I really like if you want to bring Wins back on a minor league deal, and this is a guy who maybe down the road you see getting into like coaching or something based on the reputation I think he has. But even if Wins isn't brought back, I believe Chris Hudgens will still be in the organization. And that's a name who probably could have made this underappreciated list we're going to talk about later on. But Hudgens was a guy who seemed to work really well with a lot of pitchers as well, and could start next year in AAA if Wins doesn't come back.
Yeah, the Orioles do have some options. And it's one of the things that we've talked about on this show a few times, is a catcher is a position where you want a lot of depth. And I feel like the Orioles, in spite of having the best catching prospect in all of baseball in their system, have really built that depth up when you have guys like, Hudgens, Ramon Rodriguez, Connor Pavoloni, even Creed Willems down towards the bottom of the farm system. Really shows that they're building up. And Maverick Hanley, whose defense, we have praised on this show repeatedly.
Yeah, plenty of options that don't get talked about for sure. Really hoping Maverick Hanley break out next year. Me too, Vivek. That's been my guy from the start. We'll see what happens with this catching rotation. But yeah, I mean, as far as the other moves go as well, like nothing surprising there either. But I swear, if Tom Eshelman finds his way back on the roster next year, he has something on Mike Elias, because I don't know why, even his AAA depth, like he's not going to provide you anything whatsoever. But yeah, I mean, best of luck to all of those guys. I hope they continue their careers elsewhere, just not in Baltimore. It's time to move on.
I just have this weird feeling that Tom Eshelman is going to be back next year and on the opening day roster. I have no reason to suspect that. I just do. I just have this feeling that it's like, it's going to be the 6th inning on opening day. The Orioles go to the bullpen, and here comes Tom Eshelman in relief of John Means.
I can't. I want to make it at least like 2 months into the minor leagues or the regular season next year before I tune out, hopefully a little bit longer. I don't want to tune out on opening day when Tom Eshelman is back on the mound.
A lot of off season to go here, but the Orioles clearing some space on the 40-man roster, which is key for obviously bringing in new players, but then also for some of the tough decisions they're going to have to make in the Rule 5 draft, which we actually have a question about that from a listener that we're going to get to in a little bit. But first, we want to talk about some Arizona Fall League news. The big story out of there is that Kyle Stowers has left the Arizona Fall League due to a minor back issue. Rock Cabato reported this over at MASN a few days ago. Seems like it's definitely a precautionary move, as Rock notes that Stowers is, this move helps make it certain that Stowers will be ready for spring training. Didn't get a lot of time out there, but I think as we talked about a lot, it didn't necessarily seem like he had much to prove after the 2021 season, that maybe this was just a way for him to face the most advanced competition that you can possibly face in any postseason minor league. Stowers, unfortunately, is not going to get that opportunity, but the good news is that at least so far, it doesn't look like it's a serious injury.
Yeah, I think that's the best thing, is that it seems like it's just, like you mentioned, just a precautionary move for Stowers. I just think that, it was a long season. He played across 3 levels. We saw the massive power numbers. We know that huge, massive cut that he has at the plate. I was shocked he was even sent out to Arizona, just because I didn't imagine we'd see any real top prospects go. But I guess maybe, keep the good vibes rolling with Stowers, so we can roll that right along to spring training and hopefully compete for an opening day roster spot. But at this point, just go home, prepare for 2022, come out fresh. I really don't think there's anything to be concerned with at all here. And I've been listening to a lot of other stuff and reading some other articles and such over the last couple of weeks since the Arizona Fall League started. And actually, there's been a lot of talk of how the pitching is kind of down. I think it's typically on the tad weaker side in the Arizona Fall League. The hitters are always much more advanced than the pitchers over there. And especially after this 2021 season, a lot of these guys they have to be gassed at this point without having that 2020 season. And so there's just a lot of talk about when you're looking at the offensive performances from these guys, that combined the pitching caliber mixed with, the air out in Arizona. It's very easy for guys to pad their stats, put up big numbers. Do you really want to risk further injury with Kyle Stowers if he's not going up against maybe the truly elite pitchers this year in the AFL? So I think it's great. Just bring him home and let's start fresh next year.
Yeah, and Stowers, I think, kind of faced a twofold issue, not only just coming off the pandemic, but he played, if you count the 3 games that he got into in the Arizona Fall League, 124 games this season across 3 levels of the minor league, plus 1 postseason league. That's a lot of time for a guy who has not played a full season of pro ball up until this year. Yeah,
it was a 2019 draft pick. So he had, half a season there in the lower levels of the minor league and then nothing in 2020. I mean, he was at the alt site, I believe, but still, that's not a full minor league season. So I think, and that swing is just so massive. I'm surprised we didn't see anything sooner, to be completely honest. He's not an injury risk guy, I don't think, but Luckily, it was nothing too serious. I haven't seen anything, though, about if he's getting replaced, because I would imagine, obviously, the Orioles would get to send someone else out there. And I was thinking it might be someone who's already in Sarasota, so they're already playing, and they can put them on a plane and send them out to Arizona. But I haven't seen anything on that front yet, so not sure.
Yeah, I haven't either, and I don't know if we should expect something there, but I agree with you that you're probably looking at an outfielder that's already in Sarasota, is already having their season extended. So rather than, stay there and do drills at the complex, they're going to go out to Arizona for a few weeks, maybe get into a few games.
Yeah. At least Yusniel Diaz looks good out there. So there's at least one positive from out there in Arizona. I know I'm looking up today, kind of midstream here. It was 15-16 was today's score. Mesa lost, and the pitching gave up 14 combined runs. And Logan Gillespie, Connor Lopridge, and Nick Vespi were part of the trio that pitched today for Mesa, who gave up those 14 runs. So kind of a rough night on the pitching front. But I want to get some takes from some people who were there, because box score watching at this point, the Arizona Fall League is not giving us too much information.
No, not at all. I know there has been some coverage there. Keith Law wrote a piece last week, I think, criticizing the robo-ump experiment that's going on, saying that it has created a strike zone that is tilted in advantage of the hitters. But beyond that, we're kind of relying on general reports and then some clips on social media. We do get the occasional good video clip. So Sim Contribute asking when the Arizona Fall League ends. It will end sometime early November, I believe, is normally when it ends.
Yeah, I think there's just a couple more weeks left. The All-Star game should be soon, and that one is televised. So hopefully some Orioles guys get on that list. And then the championship game will be televised as well. And that's a coin flip. Who knows who's going to make that? Who knows what the rosters are going to look like by the end of the year? I was listening to Kevin Goldstein's podcast, Chin Music, today from his episode last week, and he had Eric Longenhagen on, and Kevin asked him, who stood out to you? Because we know Eric Longenhagen is out there on these fields watching these games. And he just kind of threw out the name, a broad question, who's impressed you out there? And Longenhagen did throw out the name of Logan Gillespie, who his first outing was 2 1/3 innings, 5 strikeouts, no hits, no walks, no runs, a great outing. He got roughed up today, but Longenhagen really loved the fastball. He said he has 2 distinct fastballs, can run up to 97 miles per hour. I think we saw 98 or 99 at Bowie earlier this year. So just the fact that Longenhagen took the time to throw out a reliever like Logan Gillespie in that segment, I think says a lot and piques my interest going into 2022.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when he's coming off a season where we saw the strikeout numbers take a significant uptick from what we had seen of him in prior seasons in the Brewers system.
Yeah. And he mentioned specifically, like, he has a unique trajectory. Like, this is a guy who's cut from the Brewers and the Orioles brought him in late. So this is probably why he's out in Arizona. But Gillespie's no slouch. This wasn't just some random reliever the Orioles brought in. The strikeouts, he wasn't a big strikeout guy before he joined the Orioles organization. And now he is. So this is a guy who could start next year in AAA and possibly see some innings at the major league level next year.
Yeah, exactly. It would be really interesting to see him break through. We'll move on to a listener question that we have here before we get into our underappreciated player segment. This comes from @OriolesStatistics on Twitter. Where do you see Sedlock and Blaine Knight fitting into a future Orioles team? Perhaps this is already part of your underappreciated talk, but I'm just curious to hear about their trajectory after starting their careers with high expectations, hitting roadblocks, and now bouncing back. Talking there, of course, about Cody Sedlock and Blaine Knight. Sedlock is a guy that is former first rounder, battled a lot of injuries in his career. Looks good in 2021, though. Blaine Knight really struggled with high A Frederick in 2019. Seemed to be written off to a certain extent coming into this year, but then looked particularly good at Aberdeen and Bowie, and then had a good run at Norfolk before I think he just tired out a little bit. Just to address the one part of this question, neither of those players was on our underappreciated list, but we do want to talk about them here for a few minutes. So, Nick, thoughts on that question?
Yeah, these are two guys that I'm thinking a lot about. Knight did struggle when he got up to AAA. Like, there's no sugarcoating that. The numbers were pretty bad. He wasn't getting swings and misses. I know there were a couple outings that you look at the line at the end of his outing in AAA, and he had no strikeouts, which is tough, and 2-3 innings worth of work. I talked about this a little bit when I recapped the Norfolk Tide season over on Locked On Orioles a couple of weeks ago, and I think a few things came into play here with Blaine Knight, and that's, his wife gave birth to their first child in late July, and that game that we were at in Bowie he pitched that day, kind of struggled a little bit. The next day he was put on the inactive list because his wife gave birth. So I imagine that his mind was elsewhere, thinking like he's going to become a first-time dad any second. So maybe that contributed a little bit. I think these guys are humans, and as much as we want them to be robots, like they just aren't. And so I think he was wearing down. He was another guy who got 2 promotions. So he pitched across 3 levels this year after not pitching in 2020. The body broke down, and then he has this newborn baby on top of that. And like, as a dad, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say that I'm not going to hold his AAA experience against him. It's not ideal because he is Rule 5 eligible. And so the Orioles have a tough decision to make. But for Sedlock, like, I had completely written him off back in 2019. I was pretty much done with him. I thought 2020 was also going to be kind of like a death blow to him after not pitching for a full season, kind of lost his opportunity there, be bypassed, or just his age finally catching up to him. But he had a pretty good year in Bowie and Norfolk. When he did get hit hard, like, it would go downhill pretty quickly. No denying that. But the fastball velocity was there, like 95, 94 miles per hour. The changeup looked really, really good at the end of the year. Just kind of, when it's on, it just looks like on MILB TV video, it just looks like it flutters in there, and it's almost unhittable. And him and Michael Baumann in 2019 were kind of like these poster boys for what the Orioles' new player development staff could do with pitchers, and it was working so far in the lower levels of the minor league. So I think just like Knight, the Orioles going to have very tough decisions when it comes to these two guys, and I'm having a hard time coming up with my like final guesses as to whether they are protected or not, because I could see both of them getting swiped by other organizations.
It's interesting because Sedlock has been Rule 5 eligible twice before this offseason, has slipped through the Rule 5 draft both times. 2020, that was not unexpected, but in 2019, he had showed improved health, better performance across a couple of levels of the Orioles system. So it seemed like if he was going to get taken in the Rule 5 draft, that would have been it. And then it didn't happen, but I just question, can you sneak him through a third time, especially because he's a guy that at the very least has shown that when he's on, he can give you 3 solid innings out of the bullpen and maybe even fit in somewhere as a back-end starter.
Yeah, I think the difference this year, too, is that he's proven that he is healthy across a long stretch now, and he can do it at AA, and he did it at AAA for an extended period of time, too. So, like, I don't know who all is eligible out there. I haven't done the homework. Again, like I mentioned before, I leave that up to Vivek to do the homework there on who's available. But, like, I mean, if you're a team like the Pirates or somebody, or maybe not the Tigers, I think they're kind of moving on this. They're kind of where Orioles fans are hoping we'll be at next year. You look at some of those teams that are going to pick early in the Rule 5 draft, they're going to need pitching. And if they can get a guy like Cody Sedlock and see if it works, try it out. Like, I have to imagine they're going to be willing to try it out. Even if he is only someone who can give them, 20 innings at the beginning of the year, it's an extremely cheap, virtually free pick for these teams. So why not at least give it a shot? And I don't think he sneaks through a third time either.
Yeah, I think it's going to be tough. Now, with Knight, when I saw Knight at his best this year, I looked at him and thought that guy's going to be ready for the Major League bullpen next year. There's no way you want to leave him unprotected because fastball is running, mid to upper 90s. He's got his off-speed stuff working, but then, as you said, he really did sort of hit a wall at AAA and just stopped. Basically, he wasn't missing bats anymore. He was getting hit around, and I'll just bring up some numbers here. His last 4 outings in particular were rough. 11 in the third innings, walked 8 batters, struck out 4, gave up 16 earned runs on 21 hits. So that accounts for a good portion of his time in AAA. And, there were uneven results here and there throughout the year, but I guess when I look at that, I'm left to wonder, did that happen because this is the most innings he's thrown? We're coming off the pandemic, and he pitched at 3 different levels this year, or is this a sign that more advanced hitters are figuring things out with him that hitters at high A and AA couldn't?
Yeah, that's completely valid. And I mean, I have those concerns too. I just think there's just all the weirdness with baseball is going to continue for a little bit longer, especially at the minor league level. Maybe the major league level, like we'll be smoothed out starting next year. But with minor leaguers and player development, I think you're still going to see effects of the pandemic continue to roll on for another year or two. So I'm willing to give him, as long as he can, if he sticks around the organization next year, I am more than willing to give him another opportunity. But I do agree that I don't think the leash is going to be very long on Knight, because he's pretty much reached a point where either you're going to miss those bats at the AAA level against more advanced hitters, or maybe this was it. This was his wall, and this is as far as he's going to go. But I'll give him one last shot to try to prove it, as long as he sticks around. But I can also see another team looking at what he did in AA this year and saying, I really like that. I want to take a flyer on him.
I mean, the Rule 5 draft can be tough to predict sometimes, because we didn't see, the Cubs taking Gray Fenter. Now, Fenter obviously ended up back in the system, but, there was a few weeks there where Fenter had a shot to make an opening day roster in the major leagues. And, obviously it didn't happen, but sometimes it's hard to tell what other teams are looking for, because that's almost how you have to try to analyze Rule 5 drafts. It's not just what fits the Orioles, but what are other teams going to be in the market for, which is why when we've discussed this on air a few times, I've mentioned, how many National League teams are going to be looking for low-cost DHs if the DH is indeed instituted, and how does it affect your decision with Robert Newstrom and whether to protect him, or even a guy like Patrick Dorian. So Rule 5 draft can be tough to analyze.
Yeah, I think Baseball America had a piece out recently about how this past Rule 5 draft being one of the more successful Rule 5 drafts in a long time. So maybe teams look at that and say, is the talent pool getting bigger and better in this Rule 5 draft? And maybe we take it a little bit more seriously, or maybe we at least, every team's going to take it seriously, but maybe we give these guys we take a little bit more time in the major leagues to see if we have something here. So I don't know. I mean, the Orioles, I think, hit a home run with Tyler Wells, and he was their second pick in that Rule 5 draft last year. So it's definitely going to be interesting. And of course, behind all this, we have no idea what is going to happen. It appears now today, a lockout is imminent, and, baseball is going to just crumble at this point. I mean, we don't know. It looks like a dark near future. And so we'll see how all that impacts Rule 5 draft and how players want to build their rosters. We don't know.
Yeah, and there's a lot, Nick just mentioned this. The AP reported today that there is a lot of difficulties that going on in the negotiations, and it looks like more likely than not, we're going to have a work stoppage because the CBA is not going to be, renewed or reworked before the December 1st deadline. But yeah, we've got a few weeks here to figure out where that's going to go, but that throws a wrench into a lot of things this offseason.
Yep, we'll see how the next few weeks go. I guess maybe just enjoy this World Series. Enjoy Jocktober if you're a Braves fan, and if you're an Astros fan, I mean, go Dusty Baker. I guess let's enjoy these last few days of baseball, because who knows what the winter's going to look like.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll move on now to our underappreciated players list. And admittedly, the criteria for this is kind of subjective. And I'll talk a little bit about my list when we get to it, but we'll start with the first player on Nick's list. And Nick, just to give us a little bit of background, how did you put together your selections?
So it's kind of thinking about topics we could talk about for this episode. And, for a minor league podcast, we're running pretty dry here. We need some news to talk about. And I just thought an underappreciated team. I thought originally an underrated team, but then I was like, no, underappreciated, I like that idea better. Guys that had good seasons. We're not saying these guys are future major leaguers. We're not saying they're underrated even. They're guys that are going to surprise us and become, huge top 30 prospects in the future. That may never be the case, but guys that grinded throughout the minor league season, they had good years, but, no one talked about them. We never really got a chance to highlight them. Maybe we even overlooked a few of these guys. And I think just a few names popped up in my head. I had about 15 names, but I whittled that way down for the podcast. The first name I thought of was Christopher Cespedes. I know we have mentioned that name a couple times, but this is a name that I just feel like I loved watching this guy crush baseballs all season long. And apparently, I was one of the few people who did, because his highlights on our social media accounts just got no love this season. And that made me sad. But he's an older guy, right? 5 seasons he spent when he was with the Cleveland organization. I'm not going to be able to get used to saying Guardians. when he was with the Cleveland organization, he was 5 years in the DSL or the Arizona League with them. No 2020 season. So that's 6 years since being signed that he was not in full season ball. Comes out in Delmarva, low batting average. He only hit 232 with a 301 on base percentage, but the home run power was there. He hit 15 home runs on the total this year, got promoted to high A, hit well in high A, raised the batting average like 30 points when he got promoted to Aberdeen. And he already got a contract for 2022, along with Nick Vespi and Ofelke Peralta right after the season. So there are a lot of outfielders in the system, a lot of younger outfielders, guys with higher ceilings. This is clearly a position of like extreme depth and talent here in Birdland. So I think for the Orioles to go ahead and just lock Cespedes down again for 2022 speaks volumes about what they think about him. And so I'm excited to see what he can do in Double-A next year, because what if? Like that's the thing with these minor leaguers. They're all lottery tickets. It's what if he hits well in Double-A? What kind of conversation are we going to be having about Christopher Cespedes this time next year?
Yeah, I agree. It's good to have that kind of depth at the upper levels of the system. And, we know that Cespedes is probably going to be at Bowie next year in maybe some sort of reserve type role, playing a few days a week. But when he's locked in, he hits the ball hard. That power is legitimate. And I think it was Eric Longenhagen who had noted his exit velocities coming into the season is kind of making him a player to watch. And we saw that, especially when he got to Aberdeen. I thought it was interesting that how much better he got when he went to Aberdeen. And I don't know what was behind that, but he was definitely a much more complete hitter at the high A level this year than he was at the low A level.
Yeah, the power, and it was kind of like with Kyle Stowers moving from Double-A to Triple-A. Same kind of thing with Christopher Cespedes. Yeah, the power may not have been there as much as it was at previous levels he played at, but he became a more well-rounded hitter, more singles, more doubles, higher on base, higher batting average. And so I really like seeing that. This isn't a guy who barely hit 200 when he went to Aberdeen with 8 home runs. Like that's what I would expect of Cespedes, but he hit a lot better than that. So I just think shout out to Christopher Cespedes, and he deserves a round of applause. And clearly the Orioles like what they saw in him this year, and he'll be back next season.
Yeah, in putting together my list for this, I tried to figure out, who did I not include in our final segment a lot, where we would talk about guys outside of our top 30 that we thought were playing well. Because you can make a case that T.T. Bowens belongs on our list, but I didn't include T.T. Bowens on mine because I think I picked T.T. Bowens for that segment 3 or 4 times. So I tried to keep that in mind when putting this together, which was who just really didn't get much recognition at all, or do I think we need to tell the story of their season in a little bit better context, which is why I picked the first player on my list, Lamar Sparks. Sparks is a guy that's been, at one point was a top 30 prospect in the system, several years ago, battled injuries, really fought his way back, and got back on the field this year in late June and played about as well at Delmarva as I think you could have hoped over 45 games, with posting a 732 OPS before getting promoted to Aberdeen and putting together solid numbers there over 27 games. As you mentioned with Cespedes, there's a lot of outfield depth in the system. So, guys like Sparks and Cespedes really have to compete for at-bats. But I think getting back on the field and making the most of his opportunities this year was big for Sparks.
Yeah, he may not look like it. The frame, he looks like a smaller frame guy, but he's got power, speed, and he's a good defender. And I mean, he was drafted all the way back in 2017, which blows my mind. And I never saw an at-bat of his until this season. Came out of the 2017 draft with all the tools there and a pretty high ceiling. And I remember I had someone reach out to me and ask right after the draft was over, hey, other than the top guys, give me a sleeper guy, give me the sleeper hitter and pitcher to watch for from this draft class. And the hitter I came up with instantly was Lamar Sparks from that draft class, because I loved what I saw, the highlights from him coming out of the high school ranks in Texas. I love the interviews that I could find with him, but these were major injuries that he suffered that wiped out virtually almost 3 full seasons. I mean, he only had 78 games of Gulf Coast League ball coming into this season. So this is a guy who you can't just look at his age and write him off immediately. He put up big numbers this year, got promoted to high A, played well there. I was extremely excited to watch him, finally get to watch him play the game on the field. And I don't think he disappointed.
No, absolutely not. I was really happy with what he put together this year.
I'm going to go. Next one on my list is a pitcher we have talked about a couple of times, but I just want to use every opportunity I can to talk about him, Ofelky Peralta. And we're going to dive into more about him when we do our Rule 5 episode, I'm sure, because he is eligible, but maybe I'm a little too high on him, but I'm fine with that. And I'm going to beat this drum as often as I can until he proves me wrong. I just think that Peralta should not be in professional baseball right now. And he's signed out of the Dominican Republic in 2013. Yeah, he was a former top 30 prospect, and he was actually seen by a lot of people outside the organization as a legitimate international prospect in this system who was signed, 8 years ago at this point. But when you're on your fourth tour of A-ball and you can't cut it in Frederick and get sent back to Delmarva, I think that would spell the end of your career. Then 2020 wipes out the season, new regime comes in, and now he's got a new contract for 2022 after a good season in AA and AAA. I don't know. He got beat up in July for sure, but then he bounced back really strong. Good strikeout numbers, good walk numbers as well. Only allowed one home run over the final month of the season with his highest strikeout rate of the year that month. The Orioles seem intent on working him as a starter, but I just think that if you put him in the bullpen, there's even more to unlock there with Ofelky. 1-2 inning stints, he can run up to 98, 99, even possibly 100 miles an hour. Let's see what happens with the guy.
Yeah, I agree. I think that you can unlock more out of Ofelky Peralta by putting him in the bullpen because you're going to see a fastball velocity tick up, as you mentioned, and I think his secondaries would play well in there as well. But honestly, I'm just happy that we're having this conversation because if you would ask me a year ago, are you going to be talking about Ofelky Peralta getting a new contract to come back to the Orioles system in 2022 and possibly have a line on a role in the major leagues early in the year, if not on opening day? I would have said probably not. Because as you mentioned, he went to Frederick, hit a wall, struggled there repeatedly, and just looked like he was going to be one of those guys that, with an good initial impression, was going to, get to Frederick with a lot of hype and never get past there. And then yet the season he put together this year was just all around impressive. And I feel like he's a guy that, we could see in a role in the major leagues next year.
Yeah. And I remember there's an article, I believe it was Steve Molesky here wrote it. I'm not sure, to be honest, off the top of my head, but where Peralta said, look, he went to the organization, or the organization came to him, and Peralta was very open about, do whatever with me. I'm yours. You develop me exactly how you see fit. And he completely trusted this system, and it worked. It paid off this year. And I think you saw improvements from Ofelky Peralta. And if anything, he's an example that you can look to and say, yes, this system can develop pitchers. I mean, they turned Ofelky Peralta from nothing into a possible major league, even if it's just a bullpen piece. That's a major league piece and a guy who shouldn't be in baseball right now. 99.9% odds that he'd be out of baseball at this point based on his career trajectory. So I think it's a really great story for the Orioles.
So Vivek asks here, is there a Jorge Lopez comp for Ofelky Peralta? Maybe start, but better in the bullpen?
I see it. I agree with that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's kind of, something you could see. I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up doing both starting and relief work in the majors, but I think he's more likely to end up in the bullpen. Speaking of the bullpen, one of the guys that I put on my list was David LeBron. And the reason that I wanted to talk about LeBron was that this is someone that between the two highest levels in the minor leagues pitched a lot of innings this year and struck out a lot of batters. 73 and a third innings between Bowie and Norfolk, picked up 106 strikeouts. Now, that came with 43 walks. But when I think you look over the balance of the season, he was generally one of the more reliable relievers, particularly in that multi-inning type role that the Orioles were really relying on for piggybacking. He got to AAA at the end of the year and put together nice numbers. Limited stint, but in 5 games, 11 and 2/3 innings, struck out 15 batters, 3.09 ERA. So a guy that at 27, a little older, but also has not pitched a whole lot coming into this year. Just one full season previously, and that was with Frederick back in 2019. So just, something to keep an eye on with LeBron.
I had him on my list as well. He didn't make my final cut for the show, but a reliable bullpen arm for Bowie. I know we had a lot of people comment in previous episodes as well throughout the season. It was very obvious that the Bowie bullpen struggled this season. But LeBron was pretty reliable and consistent. Him and Diogenes Almingo was another guy that I was going to throw up there, but two reliable arms out of Bowie's bullpen. The high strikeout rate continued in Norfolk. Another example also of a guy who could not pitch very well in Frederick, but yet he turns it around in Bowie. I mean, we've seen this a lot. We've talked about a lot of these guys. Like Frederick was just a graveyard for these Orioles pitchers. And LeBron really turned it around. The walks are an issue. They can climb up and pile up pretty quickly. And I don't believe he's a big velo guy. I want to say he's like 91, 92 miles an hour with the fastball from the right-hand side. So like, but there's a lot of swing and miss stuff there. You mentioned the strikeout totals. If he can just find the strike zone consistently, like I wouldn't be shocked to see him up in the major leagues. Even if it's just one of these cup of coffee guys and the Orioles have to move on, he's going to get an opportunity, I think. And I believe it was the Rangers, but like Michael Elias traded for him. I think it was like international slot dollars or this is some money that they sent over to Texas, I believe. But this is a Michael Elias guy that he targeted. So keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, picked up in a trade February of 2019.
There you go. So I would just keep him in mind. Next list, I don't know if we ever mentioned this pitcher once on the show all year, but it's Jake Prezina, who spent most of the time in Aberdeen. Like literally no one talked about Jake Prezina all season. And like, we probably should have done a better job of hyping him up as well, but this is why he's on our list. Zach Peak name dropped him a couple of weeks ago when he was on the show as a guy that Peak regularly turns to talk pitching because of what a great resource he is. And I really love that. I love knowing which players are the go-to guys for other players because it's always guys like Jake Prezina, guys you would never imagine that other guys are going to and looking for help in certain areas of their game. Prezina, 24 years old, lefty, a 31st round pick. That's something that you're not going to see anymore out of Seattle. So smaller school guy, late round draft pick. This was his first season of pro ball, and he had a 3.56 ERA, a 1.19 whip, 228 average against between Delmarva and Aberdeen. Again, a lower velo guy is not going to overpower you, but I also think that if you compare him to like your Drew Rom, Zach Lowther, Alex Wells, he's going to rank lower than those guys, and the stuff isn't as good. But he's a solid lefty who's put up good numbers across 2 seasons, a season and a half in the Orioles system. I imagine he starts next year in Bowie, where we can get a better idea of him because spending all year in Aberdeen didn't really help anybody as far as like getting to know who they are because there was no broadcast. There was no information coming out of Aberdeen. So I think that adds to this. But Jake Prezina is definitely a name to see how he starts out in Bowie next year. See if he can handle that level of competition.
Yeah, he's been really solid since he came into the Orioles system. And I liked hearing from Zach Peak about that as well, that Prezina is a guy that he looks to for advice because, we really didn't hear much out of Aberdeen. So just to kind of hear the nuances of what these players are like and how they go about their business. In Prezina's case as a pitcher is interesting. And, like you said, he's probably in Double-A next year. So we'll learn more about him. But I think with what he did in 2021 definitely came through as a pleasant surprise.
Yeah, I think I remember from 2019 class, I think he gave like no home runs and across like almost 40 innings his first season. And the home runs weren't ridiculous, I think, this year with Aberdeen. So just a name to watch. I love the lefties. Let's see if call him a crafty lefty if you want, I guess. Let's see if he can craft his way up to the upper levels of the minor leagues. And I love these. Jake Prezina is like exactly like the type of minor leaguer that I love following and why I love minor league baseball so much. Because what if he hits? Amazing story.
Yeah. It absolutely would be. So my next player on this list is a guy that we talked about a lot right after he was drafted, but then didn't, I feel like, spend much time on once he actually started playing. And that's Dante Williams, the Orioles' 4th rounder in the 2021 draft. And I'm just going to run off some numbers here. 21 games at Delmarva, 798 OPS, 5 stolen bases in 6 attempts. And although we don't really have any numbers to back this up, reports on his defense are glowing, going back to his time in Arizona. And while there are a lot of talented outfielders in the Orioles system, you look at a guy like Williams and think that there's a pretty solid base there because of his glove work, because of the fact that he was, generally a solid hitter at Arizona, but definitely seemed to come into his own a little bit more in 2021. So I think going into 2022, he's going to be one of those guys that I'm looking at of can he get somewhere where he gets consistent at bats to start the year and emerge as a breakout candidate. But his 2021 was also pretty good.
Yeah, playing time is going to be the issue for him for sure because it's so deep. And I remember as soon as the pick was made, the MLB pipeline guys were like prototypical fourth outfielder, like safe kind of whatever pick for the Orioles. Like they didn't seem too excited. But since then, like I've seen other people, I've seen Orioles fans who like they really love Dante Williams. Like this is their guy that they're following, that they think they can break out. I've seen others outside of the organization who are kind of high on Williams and his ability. Mentioning Eric Longenhagen on Kevin Goldstein's podcast last week, he threw Dante Williams' name in. There's a question about the Orioles and the rebuild and how that's going. And Longenhagen, of course, took the prospect route, and he mentioned Dante Williams as part of this group with Servideo and Stowers as like they're risky picks, but like they're really sexy picks. And Longenhagen loves Dante Williams. So to name drop Williams there, I thought was pretty awesome as well. You know, more walks and strikeouts when he was with Delmarva this year. You love to see that. I love the speed. The outfield does seem to be his top calling card for right now, but I could see this being a sneaky good pick for the Orioles. A raw hitter with decent skill set. And when you're talking about an outfielder with good raw skills, look at Robert Newstrom, look at Kyle Stowers, look what they did with Zach Watson, look what the Orioles did with those guys. Dante Williams is another one who I think the Orioles could unlock a whole lot of stuff with next year.
I'm glad you mentioned the walks because that's not a trend that's limited to Delmarva. I think when we had Stephen Loftus on for our day 2 draft show, he noted, Williams' patience at the plate. And at Arizona this spring, Williams walked 50 times, struck out 40 times in 62 games. And if you look over the course of his college career, especially after his freshman season, that was pretty much a trend. He was posting walk rates well into the teens every season there. And then, in that shortened 2020 pandemic season, at the time that the college baseball season stopped, his walk rate was over 20%. So this is a guy that has a well-established track record in college of being a patient hitter, and he brought that into pro ball this year.
Nope. And I mean, that's Pac-12 competition. So I mean, this isn't some small school guy who was facing like really bad pitching. That's Pac-12. He's facing a lot of really stud pitching staffs over there on the West Coast. So love to see that. Again, like I said, could be a sneaky pick. We'll see if he can crack these lineups. That's what I'm anxious to see. How do the Orioles get all these outfielders playing time next year? But I'm going to go to the next guy on my list. I'm going to go back to pitching, and I'm going to go with Jake Lyons, a guy who kind of overlooked early on in the year, but then the numbers started piling up, and he got close to this promotion to high A. He's a 6'5", 280 pounds. That's what he's listed as. Very big boy. Works very quickly. I love games where he pitched because they would go so quick. A Lucas Giolito style delivery out there on the mound. 22nd round pick out of Oklahoma State. He struck out 102 guys across 79 innings between Delmarva and Aberdeen. Closed out the year with 17 strikeouts over his 11 innings that he got with the Ironbirds. He only walked 3 when he was with Aberdeen in those 11 innings. Love the stuff. A lot of swinging strikeouts with high fastballs. Hitters just can't catch up to it. I think this is an arm who could be converted into a relief role and move up quickly through the system. High strikeout numbers, easy transition to high A. I think that's why I put him on my list. He was an underappreciated arm in the system all year. I think he deserves some attention heading into 22. And we'll see, kind of like Ofelky Peralta and a lot of these other guys, like, do the Orioles go ahead and make that move now in the bullpen? And does that skyrocket him up the system even quicker?
This is a good pick because pitchers like him really are a key to building, that talent pipeline of just having arms in your system you can depend on. And I agree with you. I think that he's the kind of pitcher that you could put in a bullpen and really see him start to move quickly. And for those that have not seen it yet, you should definitely check out Lyons' delivery on video because there is a definite Lucas Giolito parallel there. Not that he has Giolito stuff, but the parallel with the delivery is striking. And similar mound presence, too.
Yeah, that's another thing with a lot of these guys in the lower levels of the minor leagues. Like, there's a new confidence brooding among these guys. Your Jake Lyons. We asked Zach Peak about his K strut and Ignacio Feliz and that K strut. There's another name on this list we're going to talk about in a minute who just had a real dominating presence out on the mound, even though he's not a big guy like Lyons is. But Lyons is this is a guy who's a sturdy guy. And 6'5", 280, like, you're not going to get beat around pretty easily. And if you need him to go 3-4 innings out of the pen, he can. And I think this guy whose stuff can also play up a lot if you put him in just one inning relief role. So a name I'm excited to watch in 2022. We'll see if he starts. Maybe starts in high A, but he's an older guy, so maybe a start out of the Bowie's bullpen next year. Who knows?
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm hoping happens, because I would be curious to see how he does there. I'm going to go with another A-ball arm that I think was a little bit underappreciated this year, and that was Griffin McClarty. Now, real big-time Orioles prospects fans will know that McClarty is kind of the answer to a trivia question. Who was the first pitcher drafted by Mike Elias in his role with the Orioles? The answer is Griffin McClarty, 8th round of the 2019 draft. So in that sense, I think he was already somewhat notable coming into this year. But what I find interesting is he's a guy that really had his fair share of ups and downs at Delmarva, went to Aberdeen and was just dominant over the last 6 games of the season. 6 starts, puts together 24 and 2/3 innings with 22 strikeouts against 8 walks. Finishes the season with 91 strikeouts and 81 in the 3rd innings pitched. Guy that throws from the left side. And I think if nothing else, you look at him going out there this year, making 19 starts, appearing in 23 games. He's going to eat innings for you in the minor leagues. And I'll be curious to see if some of the improvements we saw at Aberdeen carry over into 2022.
Yeah, I love my CAA guys. He's out of the College of Charleston, so I watched him dominate my alma mater for a couple of years down there when he was in college. And another guy, I'm glad I get to root for him and Kyle Branovich. I'm so glad I get to cheer for them, not against them anymore. He came out, I think, grinded his way through the year and came out looking like an improved pitcher. And I was, to be honest, anxious to see how he was going to perform in high A after that promotion, because you look at the Delmarva numbers and you watch him in Delmarva and there's like high ERA, walk numbers were okay. Like guys hit him and they got on base at a high clip against him. But he did a fantastic job of keeping guys off base at high A. Small sample size, sure, but he also went a lot deeper into outings, a lot of 5-inning starts over those last 4 or 5 weeks of the season. And that was something that I don't think he did. I don't even think he did it once until like August when he was with Aberdeen. So Mike Elias' first pitching prospect he drafts with Baltimore at least enters 2022 on a high note.
Yeah, exactly.
My next guy, let me see what we got next on the list. I have 2 more here. I'm going to go to hitters, and I'm going to go with Andrew Daschbach first. And I know I can't remember who it was, so I apologize, but I know a while ago, like 2 months ago, I think at this point, someone did reach out and was like, hey, talk about Andrew Daschbach. I'm intrigued. So we're talking about him now. A guy we overlooked, and he's a first base prospect. He can play the outfield a little bit, which I think is going to help him, but he's a first base prospect, and we know, like, unless you're mashing 40 home runs with a high batting average and huge walk numbers in the minor leagues, like, you're not really going to be seen as a prospect of note. He's never going to crack a top 30 list. He also strikes out an absurd amount, like 35, 36% strikeout rate in AA this year. So that is troubling, but he tapped into that power this season that we were hoping we would see. He's coming out of Stanford. Same draft class as Kyle Stowers and Maverick Hanley when the Orioles drafted 3 Stanford guys. 16 home runs on the year, 8 at each level, good on base numbers, like around 350 combined. There's a stretch there too in Bowie where if you needed a late inning hit or an extra inning hit, like Daschbach was your guy. He had a couple of walk-off victories. We'll see what he can do at the next level when he gets up to AAA, but I'll say at least, like, I know there's the interview he had with Paul Mancano before the season started, and he mentioned where he wanted to cut down on the strikeouts, which he didn't quite do, but he wanted to use the entire field more, which he definitely did if you look at his batted ball data on Fangraphs. And he wanted to tap into his power and become a more well-rounded hitter, which I definitely tapped into that power. So, it's you want to see development. And I think, to say the least, Andrew Daschbach developed this year and became a much more better overall hitter. So, again, just like a lot of guys on this list, he's at least entering 2022 on a high note. But now let's see if he can take that next step.
When the month of May ended, Daschbach had appeared in 16 games, was hitting 185 with a 612 OPS, and had already striken out 26 times. So he got off to a really slow start this year, but then turned it on, which I think, as you said, is part of his development. And it was good to see that development this year. The other thing I like, too, is that he does give you some versatility. He can play the outfield. And while I don't think you're going to mistake him for a plus defender out there, he can at least move around the diamond a little bit, which gives him a little bit more upside than just the typical first base DH, first base prospect that mashes at Double-A, but doesn't really do much else.
Yeah, I am concerned. I like Dashbach a lot, and I kind of get like JC Escara vibes with him though, because Escara was a guy who I really overlooked at the lower levels, but as he started climbing up the organization, I really like JC Escara. I love the power from the left side there. Good defender at first base as well, but he really struggled in AAA, and so I'm anxious to see if Dashbach can make that jump to AAA. At least this season was a good start, we'll say. But yeah, I don't think we really talked about Dashbach. And another guy too, like his highlights got no love from Orioles fans. Come on, guys. He slugs home runs. We'll see what he does next year, though.
Yeah. So I'm going with another position player as well, but it's a guy we just talked about a little bit last week, and that's Ramon Rodriguez, who is out in the Arizona Fall League now. Yeah, you look at the bat, he appeared across 3 levels this year, put up okay numbers in 54 games. He did hit well at Aberdeen, but that's only a 22-game sample size. Yet when we had Zach Peak on the show, he talked about how much he loved throwing to Ramon Rodriguez this season. I can't imagine that he's alone in that feeling. And it's a bit of an interesting background because Rodriguez was originally drafted by the Dodgers back in 2018, back in 2016, was released in 2020, and then was picked up by the Orioles before this season. Still only 22 years old, which when you factor in the pandemic, the fact that he lost time because of being released, and that he was drafted, 5 years ago now, that's still a guy that's young enough, I would think, for some development where, if he continues to work well with pitchers and shows you good defense and it's just okay with the bat, he could stick around the system for a while and probably be a guy that catches the high levels because of what he gives you behind the plate.
Yeah, the age is a big thing there. I mean, catchers, it could be, you're looking at another 3-4 years before he could hit his prime of being a catcher. I did also enjoy Zach Peak calling him out. I was not expecting that as well. For a lot of the things, that's the stuff, like, it's hard for us to see. I mean, and I know that's why a lot of guys, they talk about, like, when you're evaluating catchers, unless you were someone who caught at a high level in college or in the professional ranks, like, you don't see a lot of that small stuff that's really going to help a pitcher out. I wish I could sit there and evaluate these catchers better, but I know I can't. And Rodriguez was a guy that doesn't put up the big stats, so you're going to overlook him. But clearly the Orioles pitchers appreciated him this year. He bounced around a couple of different levels, so the Orioles were at least confident enough in his abilities to catch these guys as well. The fact that he was drafted by the Dodgers piques my interest as well, because we know how good the Dodgers are at developing pretty much anyone they select. So, yeah, definitely an interesting name, and he's out there in Arizona Fall League right now. Maybe it should have been Maverick Hanley, and maybe he wasn't healthy, and that's why he didn't get sent out there. The Orioles needed to send a catcher, and Rodriguez was a healthy body. But, at this point, he's an interesting guy, young guy too, and a pretty good defensive catcher on the back end as well. Oops.
So now we'll go to Nick, who's his final player on the list.
I thought I froze there for a minute.
Oh,
your screen went fuzzy. My last name is Patrick Dorian, and I felt like even though we have talked about him a little bit this year, and some other Orioles fans, I know he's on the list of looking at guys who deserve a shot next year at the major leagues. Patrick Dorian is a name that gets mentioned a couple of times, but I just think that he deserves more hype, and it's difficult. I think all three of us have difficulties in pinpointing like exactly what his future looks like, but I think Dorian is the type of player that gets overlooked very easily, and he was one of the first guys that came to my mind when I'm thinking of guys who are underappreciated this year. 21 doubles, 22 home runs, an 815 OPS in Double-A, really good defense in the hot corner, good walk numbers. Like, he didn't get promoted to Triple-A, which I know a lot of people were calling for, and I think he should have. He didn't get promoted until like the final stretch, so he only had like 3 or 4 games with the Tides. And I imagine it's because Rylan Bannon's injury and Rylan Bannon's inability to get out of Norfolk probably hurt Dorian's opportunity a little bit. But like, Dorian also played over 100 innings at first base in Bowie. He can play the position, yet Norfolk decided to keep this like circus act of Ryan Ripken on the roster all year, which was an absolute joke. Yet Patrick Dorian kept his head down, kept grinding for Bowie, and put up a really good season. And so I believe he's Rule 5 eligible this year. So I don't think he gets protected. I'd imagine teams maybe want to target, You just mentioned like it's possible to predict what happened in the Rule 5 draft. Dorian, you have to imagine, is going to be on some team's list, I think, at least to look at. So I don't know what the future holds for him, but I hope he comes back next year and is in camp at least to get an opportunity. He's 25, but I don't think that doesn't mean anything. He had less than 200 games, I think. I don't have his numbers in front of me anymore, but I think he had less than 200 professional games under his belt before this season. So still plenty of time for him to develop. Yeah,
very little professional experience. And I like that you brought up the defense because I think the power numbers spoke for themselves this year. But good arm at the hot corner. Not necessarily the best range, but the arm over there is good. And I thought he looked good at first base as well. So if the Orioles do protect him, which I wouldn't be opposed to at all, you do have a little bit of that versatility. He could play both corners. And I think even, if you see a healthy and more productive Rylan Bannon next year, Bannon is not going to match Dorian's power if you compare those two side by side. So, if Dorian does stick around, I think there's definitely a role for him.
Yeah. And I'm mentioning, I don't know, I feel like Kelvin Gutierrez gets a leg up because that defense is so good. Mm-hmm. And if the Orioles are going to prioritize defense over offense next season, especially in infield, then I could see Gutierrez maybe getting another shot, but Bannon wasn't a Michael Elias guy. And I don't remember off the top of my head, but was Michael Elias, did he trade for Patrick Dorian or did Dorian come to the organization before Elias?
I believe Michael Elias traded for him, but I'm double checking that right now.
So if he was, I don't know how much all of that really plays into this. If Rylan Bannon, the Orioles think he's a good player, then he's a good player and they're going to give him that opportunity. But that's just something else that I keep in mind thinking about it moving forward.
Yes, he was a Michael Elias pickup, June of 2019 from the Pirates system.
Okay, so yeah, great season for Patrick Dorian, and we'll see if he's around next year, what this roster looks like.
My final player is someone who struggled a bit at the end of the year, but for much of the summer had a case as at least the steadiest pitcher on the Verge roster, and that's Houston Roth. Started off really strong, and particularly over June and July was really good. Not really having, not big-time strikeout numbers, but also not walking a lot of guys and limiting hard contact. Hit a little bit of a wall over August and September, and I don't know how much that had to do with innings pitched, but Roth ended up finishing the year with 81 in the third innings pitched, far more than he ever threw at Mississippi State or in college. So, overall, mixed results. But I thought that Roth for most of this year was a really reliable arm in Delmarva. Ends up, 77 strikeouts, 81 in the third innings pitched. He left, he showed enough there this year for me to be intrigued about what he can do. And especially if you couple that with the solid run that he had at Aberdeen back in 2019 after he was drafted in the 29th round that year out of Ole Miss, to correct my earlier statement. But Roth put together a good season.
He shoved for a long stretch down there in Delmarva. And I know the nights where they had Zach Peak start and Roth was like the piggyback option, those were some of the more fun games to watch all year down the minor leagues. And you saw the promotions, when the promotions really started picking up earlier in the year, you never heard the name Houston Roth. And he stayed in Delmarva all year. But at that point, I think he really started to struggle. You mentioned that wall. I think that's what it was. The strikeout numbers weren't huge, but he kept the ball on the ground, in the yard, not a lot of home runs he allowed. He has 3 good pitches. I love the intensity on the mound. Again, another high-energy guy out there. I'm excited to see what he can do with a fresh start in 2022, but I think the big issue was that he just hit that wall this year and tired out like a lot of pitchers did for obvious reasons this season.
And he'll be 24 next year in high A, which I think, given the circumstances of having missed a full season, is not bad at all. So definitely see what he could do in Aberdeen's rotation next year.
Yeah. And I know Bob, let's shout out, Bob did throw a name in our chat when we were talking about this segment. I'll throw that one out there too. Bob wanted to shout out catcher Cody Roberts. And I think we talked about Ramon Rodriguez already and some others, but I think there's a very long list of highly underappreciated catchers in this system because the offensive numbers weren't there. And, some guy named Adley Rutschman's in this system, but Roberts played across 3 levels this season, a 359 on base percentage across those 3 levels. His hit in Bowie was the hit that propelled Bowie into the playoffs, a clutch key hit late in the game. I always looked to Roberts when he was in the lineup just because you look at his lower levels, his first 2 years in the Orioles system, they're like no offensive numbers to really look at. Never been a guy like that's ever been highlighted on like any list or any conversation anywhere. Just a guy, just minor league filler basically. But, he stepped up this year, and he was a guy who bounced around and I think had the confidence of the Orioles regime. Guys like him and Ramon Rodriguez clearly provide value to this organization and the pitchers in the system, which is pretty crucial right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we talked about earlier, any sort of catching depth that you can build is a good thing. And I think to have guys like Rodriguez and Roberts in the system is good because you want that continuity level to level. As pitchers move up, you want them to feel like they have a good catcher to throw to at each level of the minor leagues. So guys like Roberts, I think, are really instrumental in that.
For sure. I think that was good. And there are more names that a lot more names that I could throw out, but I think that was a good list of guys that Orioles fans could be excited for going into next season. Other than guys that, not on the top 30 lists, a lot of these guys weren't even on our top 50 list. So then that just speaks volumes about how deep this system truly is going into next season.
Yeah, completely agree. And I know that Nick and I are looking forward to having Bob back next week. I think Bob is at Disney right now, probably telling Donald Duck how good Gene Pinto is. At least that's what I think that Bob is doing. I don't know. We'll confirm that next week. But hopefully he's enjoying his vacation, and we look forward to having him back. Before we wrap up, Nick, any final thoughts?
No, I mean, there's really no news in Birdland, I guess. But I guess we're here. The World Series starts tomorrow night. I mean, throw our preseason predictions out the window. Do you have a final pick now that we know the final two?
I think the Astros win it. I'll go Astros in 6.
For obvious reasons, I want the Astros to win. Obviously, this is who we're trying to. We got Michael Eyes here, but I'm gonna have to go Braves. I'm gonna go Braves in 7. I think I have to do that because I have a lot of friends who are Braves fans, and if I said anything different, I don't know if they talk to me anymore. So go Braves.
Plus, if Kobe Mayo looks like Austin Riley in a few years as far as a player goes, I'll be very happy. So that is one thing that's been fun with the Braves.
For sure. And I want to see the Jock Peterson celebration because the pearl necklace with the red wine after they clinched the World Series was pretty epic. So go Jock Peterson.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll be back next week with Nick, myself, and Bob Phelan. In the meantime, continue to follow us on Twitter at BSL on the Verge and check out Baltimore Sports and Life for the latest Ravens, college sports, Orioles coverage, and more. We've also got some high school sports on there. Be sure to join the message board, hop into the discussion, and interact with Baltimore Sports and Life writers along with our board contributors. For Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden, and thank you for listening to this episode of On the Verge.
High Five Casino. Social casino fun with real prizes and big Vegas hits. Have you had your high five moment today?
Hey there, I'm Bob. Before High Five Casino, my high fives were more like low 3s. But after my high five moment, boom, high fives all around.
That's the spirit. High Five Casino is turning every moment into a high five moment. Visit h5c.fun. That's h5c.fun and start spinning and winning today. High Five Casino. High Five Casino is a social casino owned. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited. Play responsibly. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
At Grainger, we're for the ones who specialize in saving the day and for the ones who've mastered the art of keeping business moving. We offer industrial-grade supplies for every industry with same-day pickup and next-day delivery on most orders, all backed by real people ready to help. So you can get the right answers and products right when you need them. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.